Welcome to the Black Lives Matter Japanese Latin American Redress Program at the University of Maryland. My name is Phil Tajitsu Nash. I teach at the Asian American Studies program. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the program and on behalf of others who are involved on campus and around the world, really. We have a wonderful panel. We have people who are from Michigan, Rhode Island, California, here in Maryland. We're going to be exploring in 2 hours. Normally it takes a lot less time. People don't always allocate enough time to get into the substance of this. And I'm very happy that we have knowledgeable speakers and we have enough time to really get some depth. I'd like to introduce the chair of our department, Professor Julie Park, who is going to give a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Phil. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very important event. I just wanted to start by first welcoming and thanking all of our amazing guest panelists. Thank you for making this time and allowing us to just kind of listen in on the very important things that you have to share tonight. Also wanted to thank our very own Phil Nash for putting all of this together. How timely and how important on this in kind of recognizing the Day of Remembrance. Phil's been with the program and has been teaching in Asian American Studies for, I won't say exactly how long, but at least for several decades. Today's program is made possible by the Juanita Tamayo Lott Endowment for Asian American Studies. I believe she's a part of the participant list today. Hi, Juanita. Thank you so much for joining us and getting the word out about this event. The purpose of this endowment is to bring Asian American Studies and UMD and the broader community together to better understand and appreciate the distinctive role of public policy across the federal, executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The goal is to stimulate civic engagement and encourage careers in federal service. So thank you so much to Juanita. She's been a longtime leader in all things Asian American and Asian American Studies in the federal government as well as in our community. Thank you, Nita. So I will hand it back over to Phil.
All right, thank you so much. I want to start our program by just giving a land acknowledgement. I'm here in the DC area on the land of the Piscataway Indian Nation, and each of our panelists is in Michigan, California, Rhode Island. Each of us is on a piece of land that was originally held by Native peoples and in many cases taken away. There are some Native communities still on their ancestral lands, but we need to acknowledge that as one of the founding human rights abuses that took place here. So moving on to our presentations, I just want to quickly give an overview. Each of our speakers is going to fill this in. Let's look at our PowerPoint presentation that you all will be getting a copy of. If we look there, our definitions. Jessica, can you show the first page, the definitions and history page? Okay, keep going. And these are some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about. The notion of transitional justice, going from large-scale systemic violations to a society where a normal functioning legal system can take place. There has to be truth-seeking, reparations, prosecutions, and some type of institutional reform. We're going to talk a little bit about accountability and redress, money versus apology. Looking back at 1619, we're going to talk about why we say Black Lives Matter. We're not going to get too much into the genocide against Indigenous people, but that's certainly a human rights abuse that we need to think about, and the Japanese Latin American situation from 1941 to the present. Next slide. Let's take a look at some of the current campaigns. Obviously, in 2 hours, you can't cover everything, but we are going to talk a little bit about the George Floyd protests, what's happening with some of the BLM groups, with Japanese Latin Americans. They just had a major decision at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And finally, I just want to mention the notion that we're talking about human rights for all people. We are not talking about an original sin. I mean, there are people who use this word, which kind of takes us into the religious realm. We really need to stay in the secular realm and remember the bottom line is just human rights for all people. And we can talk about exactly how we define that, but human rights for indigenous people, for African Americans and African peoples, and for all people is where I hope all of us are headed. Let's go to the next slide. We have some tremendous resources that the panelists have recommended to us, and we don't have time to get into them today. We are asking that if you have other resources that you want others to learn about, please go to the chat and send them to us. And before we post this, we can include more resources. So let's go to the next page, and you'll see there are some race and redress resources, some books that are very good introductions to these issues. The next page, you'll see there are some resources, links about the various kinds of Black Lives Matter organizations, because just like the civil rights era of the 1960s had Malcolm and Martin and so many other leaders and groups, this movement is multifaceted. So, and again, we have HR 40 and the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Thanks to Nita, our benefactor, she was a major public policy person over many years at the Census Bureau and other places. And she reminds us that it's good to be out on the streets, it's good to be protesting, it's good to be in academia, but ultimately, what are you doing in the halls of Congress and the state legislatures? What are you doing to turn our idealism into legislation that can be passed to enforce the rights that we all cherish? So let's go to the next page. You see there are more books that are here recommended by Jerome. Let's go to the next page. You'll see that there are even more. There's the Zinn Education Project, which has some good books for those of you who are teachers. Next page. You'll see that Grace has given us a bunch of Japanese Latin American resources. I recommend you go there and sign the petition to support the Japanese Latin Americans. The video that you're going to see today is here. You can read more about this major victory in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and the book Years of Infamy by Michi Weglin, which helped to kick off a lot of this redress discussion. Next page. Aniya is part of a group called Youth versus Apocalypse. Law-rel is part of a group called Arise. We have their URLs right here. You can read more about the work they're doing. Next page. And finally, I listed a bunch of legal defense resources because unfortunately, when things are happening out on the streets in our communities, it's good to have people who are advocates who can help us. And these are just a few of the wonderful groups that are doing good work to support our human rights. So again, these are the groups that came to mind to me, but if there are others, please let me know and we can add them to the list. Okay, with that being said, thank you, Jessica, for the slides. Why don't we start with Jerome? Could you please take it away?
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to thank Phil and the university for this invitation. And I think it's quite timely that we have this discussion. I think sometimes we get lost when we talk about where this began. I look at the year 1619, when slaves arrived at Jamestown, Virginia. For the next 246 years, up until 1865, those people and their descendants were treated as property. They were not only treated as property, they were brutalized, they were raped, they were lynched, they were castrated, they were burned, they were made to work for free from sun up to sundown. It's been estimated that some $17 trillion is owed them in terms of pecuniary compensation for free labor for 246 years, and the pain and suffering of slavery, of chattel slavery, of being reduced to the same status as less than an animal, less than a beast, because animals weren't treated as bad as slaves were. There has been compensation for some slave owners who were paid about $8,000 in today's money for each slave they owned after the emancipation. They were given money because it was felt they were deprived of their property, but not one slave was given one dime in compensation. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge that's argued in reparations. That's the challenge that's argued today in HB 40, which is legislation pending in the United States Congress. It's been introduced every year for the last 30 years. And there's some people who just get so confused. They just can't understand what is it that people want. Why would they want compensation for 246 years of free labor? Most people want compensation for 1 day of labor, let alone 246 years. And when we talk about the violence and the degradation of being held in chains and branded and raped and hung and castrated, that shouldn't really require a lot of discussion. So I just wanted to begin there because there's been some confusion. 45 was confused as to why people would talk about 1619 instead of 1776, as though more than 100 years of slavery in the beginning didn't make the 1776 Declaration of Independence possible. So I think that that's a good place to start, and that we should look from there to the harm that's come after. We had Jim Crow segregation, at least from 1865 on through perhaps 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was passed. We had lynching that went on in this country for a good 100 years. So we have some real problems to look at. And I just want to say that there are very few people in this country who understand the extent of what slavery was about, even less who understand what it meant for Japanese people to be rounded up during World War II and put in concentration camps. And even fewer still realize that people were rounded up in South America and brought to the United States and put in concentration camps. And when you tell them this, they're like, oh, no, that couldn't have happened here. Oh, yes, it did. So I think it's good if we just lay those cards on the table right up front and we have a discussion to help clear the air and help people to get an understanding of what we're dealing with. Phil? Professor Nash. He's gone and he just left the teacher with a microphone.
I had to unmute myself. Go ahead.
Okay. No, you go ahead, Phil.
Okay. So we're having several speakers who know the same ground. And this is a little bit of a challenge because they all could give the whole lecture. I looked at the slides that Aniya had put together. I talked to Law-rel yesterday. So Jerome has given us a very good overview, and now we're going to have two younger people give their presentations, their perspectives. Let me just say, I've been doing these type of programs for 40 years, and at this point, I've known Jerome for over 3 decades. I've worked with Grace for over 3 decades. And a lot, oh, sorry. I mean, Jerome is 21 and looking good. But when I decided to bring in some of the younger perspectives here, I talked to my godson and he talked to other people. And we reached out to 2 younger activists who I have never worked with before. And I've gotten to know them and respect their work. But I think this is part of what Black Lives Matter has done for us. It's allowed us to take a chance and to reach out to people. And so I'm inviting Law-rel and Aniya here to come and talk about Black Lives Matter. Remember that Black Lives Matter is a broad term, broad category. I have 10 minutes for each of them here in the program, but if each of you want to take a little bit of time, go ahead. While we're waiting, I just want to say that Aniya is a young activist who's been doing things for 5 years. And I was so impressed, the stuff she's done in 5 years. I know I didn't do in 5 years at that age. So she is really very inspiring. So welcome, Aniya.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me here. Hi, my name is Aniya Butler. I'm a 14-year-old activist from Oakland, California. I'm an activist and organizer with Youth versus Apocalypse. YVA is a Bay Area-based group led by frontline youth fighting for climate justice while also advocating for social justice. I'm a lead circle member with YVA, which is basically the board. I am also the coordinator of the Hip Hop and Climate Justice Initiative within YVA, which is a strategy to uplift our campaigns and curriculum through hip hop, making our resources more accessible to the frontline communities of oppression and climate change. I am also a published poet and a spoken word artist. 2020 has been a significant year with the pandemic, peak in Black Lives Matter movement, social media, and so much more. When we think of protests, we usually think of marches, which is normal, but there are so many different forms of protests we have seen, and a lot of them have been done in 2020. We will look at some forms of different protests done in 2020 for the Black Lives Matter movement. Art has played a huge factor in the BLM protest. Art includes poetry, spoken word, music, graffiti, dance, other visual art, photography, murals, and so much more. We have seen a lot of art in the BLM movements. Art really grasped the attention of news broadcasters, government power holders, and the people. Art is a way of expressing your feelings, expressing the wrong in something, and the change you want to see. Art demands to be heard, and it can be a more accessible way of learning to a lot of more people. So here's just some art done in 2020 for the Black Lives Matter movement. Here we see a mural, and then on the right side is actually Destiny Art Center, which is a dancing program in Oakland, California, who believe in social justice and dancing, integrating and intersecting. And then below is just some graffiti, photography, and other art. YVA created the Hip Hop and Climate Justice Initiative because of the importance and impact art has on the climate justice and social justice movement. When we started it, we thought, how can we sort of intersect climate change and climate justice with hip hop? And so, we just learned more about hip hop. We learned more about climate justice and how they really intersect. In October, we dropped our single and music video, This Is the Time. In the song, we really encouraged adults to vote and encouraged youth to organize within the communities to help adults vote. We also wanted to highlight the apocalyptic times we're in and recognize this country's foundations of capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, systemic racism, and really all systems of oppression were really crumbling and we were seeing them fail. Through hip hop, we took all of this and put it on a song, which was educating, empowering, and also demanding. Workshops and panels are another form of protesting. When attending workshops and panels or speaking at them, you are allowing yourself to learn about the movement and ways to fight back. Education is a revolutionary thing, which is why people of color have limited access to it and also receive a poor education. Education is a form of resilience and it's empowering. You can also teach others about the information you learn through education. The more people who are educated, the more effective the movement will be. Because of COVID and being in quarantine, we have limits to our forms of protesting. Social media is the main, if not the biggest factor in the outcome of the 2020 Black Lives Matter protest. Youth organizers have really taken advantage of social media and used it to educate people about issues going on, spread resources around, promote actions. It has also been a big outlet for youth to express their emotions and thoughts about the struggles and times we go through. Blackout Tuesday was an action to protest racism and police brutality that originated in the hip hop industry. Our social media, we posted Black screens with the hashtag Blackout Tuesday. Many celebrities participated in this online action. Along with posting a Black screen, you were also supposed to not post on social media, only post a Black screen, identify ways to help your community, suspend music streams, and cancel participation in dance studios, classes, and meetings. Another example of social media playing a role in the Black Lives Matter movement is with the killing of Ahmaud Arbery. A lot of people did not know about the killing of this innocent Black man until a video surfaces him running away from his killers, and a lot of people, it got a lot of views, it got spread around a lot, and then, the news eventually caught it, and a lot of pledges, actions, and protests were organized to achieve justice for him. Another example is recently in the Black Lives Matter protest, there has been a lot of violence between the protesters and the officers. A lot of videos were taken on live broadcasting through social media, and this helped prepare the protesters, to either bring goggles, wear long sleeves, and help, make sure they were prepared so they can be prepared in terms of action with police officers. Another big role social media has played is with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. This hashtag surfaced social media after Trayvon Martin was killed in 2013. This hashtag is what really marked the beginning of this revolutionary movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. Marches can be considered the most typical forms of protesting. In 2020, all states in the U.S. participated in the Black Lives Matter protest. Over the summer, I helped organize several Black Lives Matter marches that took place in Oakland, California, and across the Bay Area. The biggest youth organized protest I attended took place near Oakland Technical High School, where there were estimates of 15,000 people attending. So now that we really went over the different forms of protests, what are the goals of these protests, and what does Black Lives Matter even mean? When most people think of Black Lives Matter, they usually think of police brutality. Police brutality is a big oppression that the Black community goes through, but Black Lives Matter does not only mean that. It also means that Black people should receive an equitable education, accessibility to mental health and after-school resources, accessibility to medical attention, polluting facilities should not be placed in Black communities, and overall, Black people should be given an equitable chance to thrive in this country and the world. So how can we accomplish these goals? The George Floyd Resolution is a resolution created by the Black Organizing Project. It asks for the elimination of the Oakland School Department. It would distribute funds once used for these police officers and put them towards school-based social workers, psychologists, or other mental or behavioral health professionals. This resolution was approved by the Board of Education. For hundreds of years now, Black lives have been seen as disposable. Corporates purposely put their polluting facilities in Black and brown communities. Recently, Chevron's refinery in Richmond spilled 600 gallons of a petroleum mixture in the San Francisco Bay. This will affect the Black and brown communities the most. Richmond residents already have high rates of asthma and other respiratory diseases, especially among youth. Corporates like Chevron continuously to gain profit, costing years of lives of low-income and Black and brown communities. Governor Newsom has increased fossil fuel activity in Black, brown, and low-income communities, passing 500 new fracking permits in 2020 alone. 92% of living around these fossil fuel production sites are communities of color, most of whom are working class. This is not only an issue of climate change, but also is an issue of environmental racism and classism. Youth versus Big Oil was a campaign in YBA demanding Governor Newsom to stop approving new oil and gas permits, to drop all existing production, and to roll out 2,500 feet health and safety buffer. The Green New Deal is a resolution introduced by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Edward J. Markey that lists 5 main goals to be achieved. The 5 goals are: achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions through a fair and just transition for all communities and workers, create millions of good, high-wage jobs and ensure prosperity and economic security for all, invest in the infrastructure and industrial to sustainably meet the challenges of the 21st century, secure clean air and water and climate community resiliency, healthy food, access to nature, and a sustainable environment for all the generations to come, promote justice and equity by stopping current, preventing and repairing historic oppression of Indigenous communities, communities of color, migrant communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth. The Red, Black, and Green New Deal is a campaign also within YBA that demands Green New Deal legislation on the local, federal, and national level, where we also focus on shifting power to the people who have throughout history and still today bear the brunt of oppression, and also defunding institutions of white supremacy and violence like police, military, and ICE, and invest those funds into community-led solutions for a truly equitable and sustainable society. Even though we're in a pandemic and in quarantine, the 2020 BLM protests still made a lot of change using different forms of protest that we went over. Black Lives Matter is a bigger issue than police brutality and is an issue to eliminate the foundations of systemic racism and discrimination of Black people. Different climate policies being approved will make a positive impact on the Black community. That's all I have today. Thank you guys so much for having me here and allowing me the space.
Well, thank you so much, Aniya. We're going to come back to a lot of that. That's a wonderful overview. We now have Law-rel, who his last name is Butler also. They're not related, but he is doing some work in Rhode Island, and he's been doing some work with the Asian American community. The way we met is I have my godson is working on just climate justice issues, and Law-rel is working on those too. So he, like Aniya, is a broad perspective person, not just limited to one thing. And he'll be talking a little bit about his education related work too. So again, welcome to Law-rel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Law-rel Butler. I am from Providence, Rhode Island. I was born and raised here. I'm a freshman at Rhode Island College. I'm an attending nursing major. And I'm currently a lead organizer for ARISE, which is the Alliance of Southeast Asians in Rhode Island for education. I'm sorry, I'm kind of nervous. But I was really excited to be a part of this panel today, just because it asked me about my involvement with the Black Lives Matter movement. And when you talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, there's always really different paths that you could take when different lenses you can look through to look at it. And there's the forefront of people who are protesting and doing strikes and walkouts and things like that in order to get their message across. But there's also another group that's kind of working with the law and doing things like that in order to get certain systems put into play to benefit all people of color. I started in 9th grade with the organization called Youth in Action, where I learned the power of my voice. I've always heard the term words are important, things you say are important, but it never really took a big toll or impact on me until I was a part of Youth in Action. I was able to facilitate at conferences, facilitate panels, do things of that nature to really get my point across. And it was really beneficial for me to actually see people who were receiving my messages or the things I was trying to display and get across, and they see me a year later and they're I remember you from such and such conference and you said X, Y, and Z, and I remembered it. So it's really something that really kept me going because I realized the work I was doing is important. I think that these youth organizations that are like being derived all across the country, especially here in Providence, are really helping youth in ways that their schools are not, which is something that my org really fights for, like as far as like educational justice and things of that nature. Just because like, you know, I didn't have like a civics education within my own school system, like growing up, especially in high school, where like, you know, you think that that's the most like key time and key point to like display that sort of information. I actually learned it through my youth group on how different ways to be like civically like engaged within my own community, and not only my own state, but like, you know, the nation as well. Because, you know, schools are not really implementing that kind of curriculum to prepare youth to be productive citizens of their own nation. And so like, how do you expect certain things to overcome and certain things to like be dismantled if you're not preparing like your youth, who are going to be eventually the next generation who's taking charge? We are actually working on we actually worked with a campaign that a student from Rhode Island had actually like sued the governor for the lack of civics education within our own school system. And that's something that we're still fighting for till this day. Just trying to make it so that way, at least in the state of Rhode Island, there's 40 states that partake in like a civic engagement curriculum within their own high schools, but Rhode Island is not one of them. So we're trying to basically build this up, because not all students really have like a good definition of what civic engagement is, or how to be like civically like adequate within their own communities, or the power that they have within their own voices and within their own communities. Another type of point that really kept me into this work was like the generational part of it, on how like multiple generations have been put in play within the same systems. I have a grandmother who was involved in integration during her high school years, and within there she was like, you know, a part of 124 Black kids. And the rest of the population in the school was white. And I believe that was like around 1,200. And I basically asked her for like what type of resources that she had, and what type of resources were they fighting for as far as like education, like, you know, equity and equality. And a lot of the things that she said to me were like the same things that I'm still here fighting for today. And I have the privilege of attending like private institutions where like teachers actually like talked to me. I actually got to the bottom of what was going on at home. Like if I didn't have Wi-Fi, they printed out certain assignments for me to do, or things of that nature, like help me out whatever way they could. And then when I transitioned to high school, I went to a public high school, which is like supposed to be one of the best the best schools within my state. But going there, I really saw like the lack of like teacher and student engagement, which I think is really important, because I don't think there's anything like such thing as like a bad student. There's just like children who are in like bad environments, or environments that are not fostering them to be like independent. And school's supposed to be a safe space where like they can come and like learn these skills, but they're not being taught these different types of things. And there's actually more cops within our schools than there are counselors, which is kind of like weird when you think about it, because like the mental health of our students is important as well, because students who leave high school and enter the real world as adults, and they're not like mentally stable, or like they don't know how to like deal with their emotions, or they don't know their own rights. Like, how do you expect these children to like actually become successful members of society? And that's the problem I really take like I take a big like problem with that personally, just because this is supposed to be a system that is helping students thrive, so they can move forward with their lives and break these like generational like curses or generational traumas that are being inflicted upon them. But then like there's nothing actually being done to get them to that point. And as far as like the counselors and not comps, we're working with the coalition of like other various youth organizations within Rhode Island, where like we're trying to dismiss SROs from schools. We've had a lot of incidents where like, you know, SROs have been like slamming children and just being really abusive and not producing a culture where they're actually trying to make a safe space for kids to come, and actually replace them with counselors who will actually do the job of getting down to the root causes and the root problems of these behaviors. And that's something that's really important for us, is like mental health and identifying like, you know, the problems that are actually occurring, because these are systems like that have been put into place since the beginning of time, especially like talking about how like, like slaves were being brought to this country, like since that beginning of time, I mean, and like these systems, we're still sitting here fighting for the same thing. So the fact that I'm sitting here fighting for something that my grandma was fighting for, it really kind of pushes and motivates me to go forward, because there aren't kids that are always going to have the financial access or like the capacity to attend private institutions to gain this sort of education. Like we need to make sure we have a system where, kids are actually being taught in schools and learning about these things in schools. So when they leave school, they're able to be productive members of society to break whatever traumas that they have going on as well. And I was talking to my grandma to prepare for this panel, and she basically brought up the point of like, Black people weren't always thought of to do like intellectual tasks, and people of color in general. And so the fact that like these systems are still being put into play to produce like stereotypes on like why like, Black people are the way they are, or why people of color act the way they act. It really breaks my heart, because my grandma is significantly older than me. Not to like put her on blast. I think she's actually on this call right now. So grandma, don't come for me. But just to see that this like long range of time where we're still trying to fight for the same things and go over the same things is really like mind boggling to me, because I want to make sure that the future generation of kids or youth in general that attend these public institutions are being adequately prepared for the real world. And I was asked also, like, how could people be involved in this work? And I honestly don't think it's that hard if you actually see a problem and you want to do something about it. You could probably just look to any youth local group within your area to see if there's any way that you can get involved, any petition you can sign, any panel that you could attend to just show your support, because seeing the problem and not doing anything creates a larger problem. But if you actually try to attack the issue head on and try to nip it in the bud as soon as possible, like you are creating a space that will benefit not only like people who are wealthy, but also people who are in need of extra help. And that's something that I've really been excited to work with my org about, because we really try to look at many issues within our own community and see like which ways we can be involved and how we can help and how we can step up. And like we do so like by just contacting our resources and utilizing like the partners that we already have to see if they're doing anything about it. And if not, we jump on it like immediately in order to create some type of system into play. But I just think that the system could be dismantled if there were enough people really focusing on the issues that really need to be focused on, instead of like, sidetracking with different like opinions and values. If you really get down to the bottom of it, everybody deserves an education, and like everybody deserves to know their civil rights within their own state and within their whole country. And if we're not actually preparing them for that, we're just creating a generation of people who are just socially unaware and aren't able to step up to the plate that they need to. But yeah, I'd say that the greatest part of my work is actually just putting in effort and putting in time to try to dismantle these systems that are already in place, and to try to create a safer space for future generations of youth to come. And yeah, that's me. That's how I've been involved within the Black Lives Matter movement. I also don't think that the Black Lives Matter movement is something that's fairly new. I just feel like it's something that's been in play for generations, but just named under different things. But it's still these same systems. If you look back into history of like any large protest, any large anything, like it's still the same things that we're fighting for. Like they're literally the same things, just in different ways. And although like things have been eased up on us, like over the course of time, things are still not where they need to be in order to create like a functioning society. And that's something that I'll always keep fighting for, just equity and equality amongst all. And that's me.
Wow, pretty impressive. I'm taking notes here. I've got like 6 pages of notes. So definitely a lot of wisdom there from a younger person. And just so everybody knows, he mentioned the word SRO, School Resource Officer. For older people, that would be the school guards. And part of what Law-rel and Aniya's generation is dealing with is the militarization of our schools. We're starting to see more and more officers coming in. And as he pointed out, less of the guidance counselors and health professionals, people we need, and instead having more people dealing with crime and law enforcement, other issues. So thank you, Law-rel, giving us a lot of background. Our final speaker, and again, this is just the intro round. We're going to have a lot more depth. I know, Jerome, you cut it short there. Jerome has so many things he's done. It was very gracious of you to give more time to our younger brothers and sisters. But I'm going to pull in some of your background as well. But let's first move on to Grace. Grace Shimizu. Grace Shimizu has been involved with civil rights, not just for Japanese Americans, Japanese Latin Americans, but for all people. She's the Bay Area coordinator working for the Comfort Women issue, helping some of the women who were victimized by the Japanese forces during World War II. She's been involved in so many, I can't begin to say all the issues she's been involved in, but her particular family situation is one that has called her into this particular campaign for Japanese Latin Americans. Her dad was one of the people who was in these camps, who was kidnapped from Peru, brought up here, put in the camps. She'll be showing us a video and talking about some of this background. Thank you, Grace, for all your years of working on these issues. So take it away.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I just want to say thanks to Professor Nash, the Asian American Studies Program, University of Maryland Community, and special thanks to Juanita, Tamayo, Lott, and the endowment for helping to make this possible. I join you all from the ancestral territory of the Ohlone peoples, and so in the spirit of solidarity and the indivisibility of justice, I also acknowledge and pay respect to the native peoples of the Americas who have been and continue to be stewards of this land. Land which was taken under unjust and violent circumstances, resulting in forced relocation, imprisonment, family separation and dispersal, and genocide, which continues to have devastating effects on indigenous peoples and this nation. And what an honor to be part of this DOR event, which is coinciding with Black History Month and with such wonderful panel members. It is so timely to be connecting the dots with the historic resistance and gains of Blacks in the U.S., which has given rise to the current advances being made by Black Lives Movement and are resounding around the world. I am a Japanese American whose grandfather and close relatives were incarcerated during World War II in 5 of the 10 concentration camps run by the War Relocation Authority. I'm also the daughter of a Japanese immigrant to Peru who during World War II endured the U.S. Latin American rendition program, whereby over 6,000 so-called potentially dangerous enemy aliens of Japanese, German, Italian, and Jewish ancestry were abducted from 18 Latin American countries for use as hostages in exchange for U.S. citizens caught in the war zones of the Far East and Europe. Of these, over 2,200 were men, women, and children of Japanese ancestry, both Japanese nationals and citizens from 13 Latin American countries, and over 800 were used in 2 hostage exchanges. I serve as the director of the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project and the Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans. In addition to our work to document and preserve the wartime history of our families and to educate the public, we have also been waging a struggle for justice for over 3/4 of a century, beginning in the concentration camps to uphold the Geneva Conventions and its protections of civilians during wartime. We pursued 5 lawsuits and 2 pieces of failed legislation, but have not been able to find justice in the United States. So we took our case to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which serves as a venue of last resort for redress of human rights violations in the Americas. In 2020, the Commission published its groundbreaking ruling that the U.S. government owes meaningful, quote, material and moral redress to the Japanese Latin Americans for longstanding violations of human rights. So we are now in a new stage of our justice struggle. What I'd like to share with you is a short video which highlights our redress struggle through the activism of our late elder, Art Shibayama, as well as the significance of the commission decision and the next steps for our ongoing struggle. Could you please start the video?
Hi, my name is Grace Shimizu. Today, our redress update will focus on last year's Inter-American Commission on Human Rights ruling in favor of the Shibayama brothers' petition for justice. We'll start with a brief video clip with an overview of our Japanese Latin American wartime history and redress struggle. Next, we'll share why the decision by the Commission is a significant milestone. And then we will wrap up with what are the next steps for our ongoing struggle for truth and justice.
Art Shibayama was just 13 years old and living comfortably in Peru when he was forced out of the only home he had ever known. During World War II, the United States government, in collaboration with several Latin American countries, orchestrated the forced removal and internment of over 2,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, which included both citizens of 13 Latin American countries as well as Japanese immigrants. Like young Art Shibayama, the vast majority were Japanese Peruvians. Shortly after the Japanese military attack on Pearl Harbor, community leaders were scapegoated and rounded up for detention throughout the Americas. In Peru, a blacklist had been generated. While not based on any real or credible evidence of Japanese subversive activity, the blacklist targeted businessmen, community leaders, and educators. In collaboration with Peruvian officials, the U.S. used the blacklist as the basis for rounding up hostages. These hostages were then to be traded for Americans held by Japan. Most of the Japanese Latin Americans were interned in a Department of Justice camp at Crystal City, Texas. But for Art and the other internees, their long ordeal did not end with the close of World War II. The remaining Japanese Latin Americans were told that they were illegal aliens and would be deported. And because the Latin American governments initially refused to allow these internees to return, over 1,000 were thus deported to war-devastated Japan. In an effort to call attention to their hidden history and to support efforts for redress, the Campaign for Justice was formed. In response to public pressure, the Department of Justice offered a settlement of only $5,000 each, just 1/4 of the $20,000 redress provided to the Japanese Americans. While supporting the decision of those who accepted the settlement, Art Shibayama, along with several others, chose to opt out of the settlement. He then filed his own lawsuit, preferring to fight for both redress and a full disclosure of the violations committed by the United States during World War II. Despite his efforts, Art was once again denied justice. His case was dismissed in the final months of 2002.
Hi, I'm Natsu Saito. I'm a law professor at Georgia State University in Atlanta. This opinion came down 17 years after the case was originally filed. And it tells us that the claims of the Shibayama brothers are really serious, fundamental violations of human rights. In this decision, the Inter-American Commission emphasizes that the principles of equality before the law, equal protection, and non-discrimination are among the most basic human rights, and that one of the objectives of the American Declaration was to assure in principle the equal protection of the law to nationals and aliens alike in respect to the rights set forth. The Commission also says states have an obligation to provide redress, or what we often call reparations, for wrongs that have occurred, even if they occurred a long time in the past. This is really a groundbreaking decision of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. It affirms the claims of Japanese Latin Americans who have struggled for justice for 75 years and reaffirms the obligations of the United States government to provide both access to information about and meaningful, quote, material and moral redress for longstanding violations of human rights.
I'm Becky Shibayama, and I am the daughter of Art Shibayama. On behalf of the Shibayama family and other Japanese Latin American families, we thank you for your support, and we share this milestone victory with you. Unfortunately, this victory is bittersweet since the decision was not made during my father's lifetime. Needless to say, it is extremely aggravating and disappointing that the U.S. government still has not acknowledged nor provided proper reparations for the war crimes committed against our family and over 2,200 Japanese Latin Americans. We would also like to acknowledge the thousands of men, women, and children of German, Italian, Jewish, and Japanese ancestry from Latin America and the U.S., including U.S. citizens who are imprisoned and used in the hostage exchanges. Until there is proper redress and justice, these crimes against humanity are ongoing. The Shibayama family stands in solidarity with all groups and communities currently fighting racial oppression. Our hope is that the published ruling can help lead to no more government-orchestrated kidnappings, indefinite detention, family separation, forced deportations, and no more children in today's detention camps.
While Japanese Americans were granted monetary redress with the passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, the Shibayama brothers were denied access because they were neither citizens or permanent residents. And in fact, their status as illegal immigrants was created by the politics of war, the racist policies, and blatant indifference to their humanity. May we pledge our solidarity moving forward to their next steps on that path towards justice.
The situations of detention, the manipulation of immigration laws, the barriers to citizenship and access to justice, the rampant discrimination, all of these are episodes and themes that are played out in the United States and around the world, and especially in situations of forced migration. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this case, from the experience. So I hope we all draw from that experience and also from the perseverance in this case. It really is an inspiration.
Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice delayed is justice denied. In Art's memory and in his honor, we demand reparations for the Japanese Latin Americans.
Our objective is U.S. government compliance with the legal decision of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We want to meet with President Biden's administration for executive action to honor and comply with the Commission's decision. We want to work with the U.S. Congress for legislative action to secure meaningful redress and reparation. We will continue our work with international human rights institutions and organizations to hold the U.S. government accountable for effective compliance. We will also mobilize our former internees and families, supporters, and the public for education and redress action. And we will build solidarity among our communities, locally, nationally, and internationally, by making connections with our histories and justice struggles. You can help. Please sign our petition to bring the Biden administration to the table to discuss redress and reparations in compliance with the Commission's decision. Mobilize your family and friends to sign our petition. Volunteer with the Campaign for Justice or the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project. Preserve and make history with us. And of course, all donations are welcome. Please stay in touch by following on our website and social media. Thank you.
Okay, so our work is part of the unfinished Japanese American redress struggle and the broader social justice movement to protect the civil liberties and human rights of all peoples in the United States. We have deep gratitude for the inspiration and lessons gained with the leadership and sacrifices of the Black community, which continues to be at the forefront of so many social justice struggles. Now, attention of the struggle for racial justice is focusing on the fight to pass H.R. 40, which would set up a study commission to develop reparation recommendations to remedy the legacy of slavery and the current impact of racism on the Black community in the United States. The Japanese American community stepped forward within a week to submit over 300 support statements for H.R. 40, and more are coming in. We know what an official government study and recommendations for remedy and reparations can accomplish, as well as its long-lasting repercussions. The Commission provided an official government framework and process for investigation and analysis, particularly a meaningful platform for survivors and descendants to share firsthand testimony of their experience and its enduring impact, and for determining recommendations for action for remedy, repair, and to prevent recurrence. This endeavor has had a positive impact on both sides seeking redress and on the nation as a whole. 7 Japanese Peruvian internees were permitted to testify at 3 of the 10 commission hearings in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. We honored those Issei and Nisei, first and second generation, for their courage to relive that wartime trauma and its aftermath, and to speak truth to the governmental and societal powers that vilified and devastated their lives with impunity. As they shared their personal stories, our collective understanding of our own history became more grounded. They spoke out to secure reparations justice so that we would not remain disposable, invisible, and unredressable. Their testimonies are rare primary source documentation of what happened, how we were impacted, and what we felt in our own words. The preservation of that historical record was crucial for my own understanding of my family and community, as well as the necessity to assert our right to redress and reparations for government violations so as to protect our Constitution, human rights, and democracy. These testimonies will continue to serve that purpose for our succeeding generations. H.R. 40 is a necessary beginning step and long overdue. We stand in solidarity with the Black community to pass H.R. 40 now. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Boy, there's so much food for thought here. One thing that we're trying to do at the Asian American Studies program here at the University of Maryland is do oral histories of some of our elders in a number of different areas. And this year, we're going to be doing oral histories of some of the JLAs and some of the redress advocates who've been participating in this campaign that's going on for almost 80 years now. So I encourage people around the rest of the country, please talk to some of the elders who are out there. It was great when Law-rel was talking to his grandmother, and unfortunately finding out that the struggles she was involved in are the same ones he's involved in 2 generations later. But I'm very hopeful that with people like Aniya and Law-rel and the broad movement, Black Lives Matter movement we saw last summer of people of all backgrounds, that we are going to see some substantive change. What I would like to do now, we have a wonderful opportunity because normally it's an hour, we say goodbye, thank you very much. Instead, we have another hour for discussion. And in order to mix things up a little bit, I would like to ask first, Jerome, what you thought about some of the other presentations. You've been involved with this civil rights work for, maybe 1 or 2 decades. So if you could just tell us the thoughts that came to your mind as you listen to the other panelists here, and what you think can push us forward with our ongoing struggles.
It's very encouraging. Both of our 2 younger panelists, very inspiring to me to know that a lot of the work that we engaged in when we were much younger, Phil, is still continuing on today. I just want to call the name of the late Yuri Kochiyama, who was a Japanese American activist who was very much involved with the Organization of African American Unity and with Malcolm X in New York City. We have a lot of areas where there is a connection between our movements. We've had as far back as 1951, William Patterson and Paul Robeson went to the United Nations with a petition and charged genocide for the not only slavery, but the 85 years of lynching, with over 10,000 African Americans lynched in this country. And they charged the United States with genocide in front of that body then. It was followed up by Lennox Hines, who was an attorney and is documented in a book called Illusions of Justice, which exposed how the justice system and convict labor was used as another form of peonage, another form of slavery, along with sharecropping and lend lease, where people were leased and lent to others for a fee as part of the prison system. Some of this behavior and activity still goes on today. I believe the what's called the prison industrial complex still pays people much less than what they should be earning when they work in factories that are in prisons, making all kinds of things like furniture and road signs and all kind of rubber tires and things of that nature. So we've got to look at how this injustices have continued over the decades, and also the intersections between them, not just in terms of race and ethnicity and language and citizenship status in this country, but of gender and of language. And we've got to understand that we've got to continue to press toward justice. The worst thing we could do right now would be to go to sleep. I hope everybody that's on will mark their calendar for November 8th, 2022, because that's the next election day that we've got to turn out massive numbers of people for. Because if we go to sleep, we're going to end up with right-wing forces mobilizing in this country. They've already begun to try to suppress the vote. I also want to point out that in Georgia, where Reverend Raphael Warnock and Senator William Ossoff were able to be elected to the United States Senate, the one demographic that made the difference, along with the African American community, was the Asian American community. And that's a story that's not told often enough. And I think we need to lift that up, because in so many places across the country, our numbers, when combined, are the deciding factors. We also have got to deal with the fact that as we talk about policing, as we talk about reforming police practices in our country, we've also got to deal with the fact that Trayvon Martin was not killed by police. Ahmaud Arbery was not killed by police. They were killed by self-appointed vigilantes who appear to have been white racists. And that's something that we've got to deal with. That's one of the things that's contained in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that I hope is going to be reintroduced in this new Congress, that was introduced and voted on by the House in the last Congress, that would address a lot of these problems, not only of policing, but would make lynching a federal hate crime. And I think that except for the rope, Trayvon Martin was lynched, Ahmaud Arbery was lynched. So we want to look at those things. We want to look at George Floyd being killed by a chokehold in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as well as Eric Garner, who was killed by a chokehold in New York City, and the case of Breonna Taylor, who was killed by a no-knock warrant in Louisville, Kentucky. So these are just a few of the things that would be addressed by passing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So we've got plenty of work to do. We've got plenty of common ground to stand on. And Bill, they say when you give a preacher a mic, it's a dangerous thing. I'm not a preacher, but my wife is. So you got to be careful every time you give me the mic. Back to you, Bill.
Oh, yeah. And aside from other things, Jerome is also a professor. So he's a PhD professor and a lawyer. And but anyway, your remarks were very relevant and reminding us about the voting on November 8th, 2022. We can't forget that. We were all happy to see the results in Georgia a couple weeks ago, but we've got to stay vigilant. I notice a couple of questions are starting to come in. Please go to the Q&A function and put your questions. Somebody just said, what do you say about University of Maryland using prison labor for their dorm furniture? What can students do about it? I don't know for a fact that that's true. Is there anybody who can give us more information about that? Well, certainly that's a question that should be discussed. And I hope that coming out of this workshop, people will, somebody, yes, Jessica told me, yes, we use Maryland Correctional Facility. Okay, so that is an issue that is worth exploring. And again, we can't solve every question here, but we do want to raise it up, and we've got 77 activists here. So please, let's get together and talk about this. Another person is saying, question for Law-rel or anyone else. In my experience and from what I've seen, Southeast Asians in America are often forgotten in the conversation about Asian American issues, and their unique issues are often ignored by many people outside the Asian American community. What can we do to bring attention to the issues that a lot of Southeast Asians face, such as police violence, crime, poverty, PTSD from the wars that have or continue to happen in Southeast Asia? Law-rel, you want to take that?
Yeah, I could take this. So as far as like, what can we do to bring attention to these issues? Like, I know for my organization, like it was deeply rooted at first as far as like helping the Southeast Asian community within where I live. But as we started to like progress as an organization, like, you know, we really started to look through like a BIPOC lens to look at all people of color. But from what I personally know, and like I know probably other panelists here can like answer and speak after me, is just like to bring attention to issues is to really like actually like blast them. So like, you know what I mean? Like what we do, like we blast certain things like individually, looking for resources as individuals. We come together as an organization and like we post up on our social media, things like that. Or if we have a question about certain issues, like we try to look for people within our own communities who could actually help bring more awareness or more attention to it. I definitely think by you just being yourself and like spreading this information to people that you know and you know care about you, and hopefully if they care about you enough, they will actually like reciprocate this like information and repeat it to other people to get it actually like, you know, broaden and like wide. But yeah, I guess like just bringing more attention by just being more like vocal about it, bring it up, or even just like look for like spaces within your own community that are trying to lift up these things and just join them and being a part of that.
Hi, I would like to say, when I first started teaching Asian American studies, let's just say many years ago, I had I noticed in the class that there were no Asian Americans. So in my first class at City College of New York in 1984, there were no Asian Americans. And so what I did was I had all my students, Latino, African American, Asian American, I had them go do oral histories of their classmates and local greengrocer, restaurant, other owners. And it was amazing the perspectives they got. They brought them back into the class. When I was teaching the following semester at another school, there were Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, and there was one woman who was South Asian. And I frankly didn't know anything about the South Asian community. So I asked her if she could talk to her mother, and we invited a professor to come up to the class from New Jersey. And I sat in the back and took notes, and I did my own reading. I had to learn a lot. Each of us has to take it upon ourselves to keep on learning throughout our lives, because you can't know everything. I go back and read stuff I wrote for the New York Nichibei, for Asian Week, scholarly articles. You know, it's amazing how uninformed I was looking back 30 years. I was doing my best. I was trying, but I just didn't know certain things. I might have used terminology that wasn't the best. But again, we have to keep growing. We have to keep learning. We have to have a certain amount of cultural competence so that when we make mistakes, we can apologize for them. We can be open enough so that if people say, hey, the way you said that is offensive to African Americans or to older people, to Jewish people, and say, oh, I'm sorry, how can I say this better? We have to keep growing. As Jerome was saying, we have someone like Yuri Kochiyama, who was working very closely with the African American community. I want to give a shout out to Grace Lee Boggs, also an activist in the Detroit area, who was a Korean American woman married to an African American man, very, very active in the African American and Asian American community. So we have many of these inspiring people who are working at the intersections of our communities. Aniya, you want to say anything related to Jerome's remarks? Hello? I'll give Grace a turn. What do you want to add? Anything based on what you heard from all these African American perspectives? Of course, you've been involved with the African American struggle for many years too, but any new things you picked up? I know I picked up the notion of a lead circle coordinator and the notion of using music videos to push your movement forward. That's certainly not something I did going back to the 70s. So Grace, what do you say?
Well, I think that, it's like people have been saying, we have to keep educating ourselves and keep learning. And it's difficult when, in school and the resources either don't exist or they're just in the process of being pulled together or getting more acknowledged, so the thing is to keep that information and to really look at the narratives that are coming out and how they reflect reality, and to engage in dialogue and critique, to have really critical thinking of that. But in addition to education, it's like I think we need to really build working relations, to have develop also joint analysis, joint strategy, joint plans for action, because it's when we begin to really build relationships, working relationships, that we get to know each other, trust each other, and are able to better work together. So I'd say we just need to build more solidarity. And, events like this program at commemorating Day of Remembrance are really good opportunities for that kind of dialogue and interaction to happen.
I'll tell a little story. Thank you, Grace. I first met Jerome back in 1980, 81. We were both law students, and our cohort came through law school not comfortable with what was going on. We were the cohort that created the critical race theory. I was there at the first conference with critical race studies. We were there looking at what was not being talked about in law schools. And Jerome and I were part of the organizing committee for something called the Third Law Student Conference at Columbia, held in the spring of 1981. And I don't remember everything that took place there, but just the organizing, just the process of coming together, talking about it, developing an analysis, exactly like Grace is saying. And one of the tangible benefits of that is, look at this. I'm still in touch with Jerome all these years. We still exchange emails and Facebook posts, and he lets me know when there's something I should know about in the African-American community or anywhere. Again, he's an African-American guy, but he used to work with the ACLU. He used to be a reporter. He's got a lot of things that go beyond just his own experience. So you're exactly right, Grace. We need to build these connections, even coming out of this workshop. We've worked together now. I anticipate working with Law-rel, with Aniya, with everyone moving forward. Now, when I've got an issue dealing with environmental justice, I have some connections here. I'm going to say, well, I wonder what the people in Providence, Rhode Island are doing about this. So I'll quick shoot an email to Law-rel. And that's literally how we build this movement. None of us is an expert on everything. I used to do a lot of environmental stuff. I was involved with the first organizing around solar power back in the 1970s. I don't do that much anymore. It's not like I don't care, but I just don't have time. I'm dealing with other issues. So when I hear what Aniya's doing, Law-rel's doing, that warms my heart. I mean, it's something that I'm glad they've picked up the ball and they've taken it far beyond anything I could have done. So let's get some more questions and answers here. We've still got 70 people on this workshop. So what are your thoughts? We fortunately still have some time to take this to a higher level. Or do any of the panelists want to add any more comments?
Phil, I just wanted to add that one of the things that came out of the Third World Law Student Conference that we put together sometime back in the 80s was that today there are the Congressional Black Caucus, the Hispanic and Latino Congressional Caucus, and the Asian and Pacific Islander caucus, as well as the Progressive Caucus in the Congress today. So that we've seen how people working together across our different backgrounds has really helped to multiply the strength of our movement, our progressive agenda, and what that means moving forward. I think that we should really focus on the fact that there's legislation pending now. I believe it's called HR 1, which is something that would really reform electoral politics in the United States. It would address taking some of the big money out of politics. It would address partisan redistricting. It would make it much more easy for people to vote by mail, to vote absentee without excuse. And these are the things that strengthen our democracy and give us a greater voice, because a lot of us live in states that are very diverse, but we have a large part of the country that's not very diverse. And they have an unequal or disproportionate amount of sway in the legislature because of gerrymandering. And that's something that's on the agenda right now. Once the census figures are finally released, they're going to first do reapportionment and decide how many congressional representatives come from each state. And that's going to set the stage. Then some states, like Michigan, where I live, may be losing a member or a seat in Congress. And then that's going to start the redistricting fight to say, well, that person shouldn't be from our part of the state, it should be from your part of the state. And that's how sometime this institutional racism plays out, not only on the federal level, but at the state government level. I mean, we've got a situation in Michigan where you have the majority of people in one party don't have most of the seats in the legislature. And the legislature is controlled right now by conservatives who don't have the numbers. That's just not democratic. So that's one of the things that we've got to address, along with some of these other reforms, and to remember that our voice is the one that makes change. It's not just that Black lives matter, Asian lives matter, Hispanic lives matter, and we've got to make folks understand what that means in our context. There's some folks who want to try to just wash everything away and say, oh, all lives matter. But yeah, they do, except some people were given money at the end of slavery for the slaves they lost, and other people were not. Some people were given money because they were held in concentration camps for 4 years, and they were American citizens, and others were not. So we've got to be able to speak in plain English. We've got to be able to continue to raise these issues, connect the dots, and help people to understand where we are and the challenges that we're looking at today. We don't want to go to sleep. We don't want to say, oh, everything's all right. 45 is gone. We've got a whole new administration. We've got new parties in the Senate and the Congress that are majority. Yes, but we've still got to be vigilant. We've still got to press the progressive agenda, because things will not change unless we make them change. And we've got to be very, very focused on December 8th, 2022. The time to do voter registration is now. The time to plan Get Out the Vote campaigns is now. Not 30 days out from election day, but now. Because that's how we build strength. That's how we continue to advance and don't get pushed back. The worst thing we could do is fall asleep at the wheel, because we think now that we've seen a change after the last 4 years that everything is fine. Everything is not fine. The forces of racism are still alive and kicking, and you've still got close to half of the population who wanted to see 45 in office for another 4 years and continue locking up children in cages. So we just need to focus on that and not let it just drift away in our consciousness. Phil?
One thing you said, Jerome, that reminded me, we really have to do a shout out to our sister, Juanita Tamayo Lott, who is the gracious benefactor of this program and other civil rights programs at the University of Maryland and at Universities San Francisco State University. But I remember Juanita as one of our leaders dealing with census issues. A lot of times, as Aniya's presentation pointed out, Black Lives Matter and other movements are visible in the streets. That's when the TV cameras are there. People say, yeah, let's get out there, let's hold up our picket signs. But she very eloquently pointed out that all this other stuff happens in education, things happen in legislatures, things happen when we talk like this and strategize. And Juanita, as a PhD demographer, was really the leader. You know, I consider her the leader. I was working at the Asian American Legal Defense Fund. I became the executive director of the Asian American Justice Center. We always turned to her for her insights because she understood politically what was going on and also understood as a social scientist, the data that was needed, because all of these discussions about social justice are predicated on having good data. Does Juanita want to say something? I know she's on the call. I don't want to put her on the spot here, but you know, you really deserve a big thanks from all of us because, you know, the census going back several decades was shaped by you and other people who were the social scientists behind the scenes, making sure that everyone was counted. Yeah. Oh, hi. So go ahead. Share your words.
So basically, let me try and say a few things. I am from San Francisco. I was very lucky to grow up in a multicultural environment. I grew up, as you know, in my book, The Legacy of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State. The people who led the strike at San Francisco State were people who were multicultural. Our families would come from the third world. They came across the Pacific and across the Rio Grande. And so I always thought that was what the world was like. And that's why we were successful to get Asian American studies, Black studies. At that point, we called it La Raza Studies and American Indian Studies way back in 1969. And it continues to thrive today. And a lot of folks have been influenced by the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State. And I was lucky enough to bring that to the federal government, because in addition to the legal system, what we have going for us is the federal statistical system. Because if you aren't in the numbers, you don't count, right? Because after any kind of talk, it's always like, okay, let's do the numbers. And so we've been fighting and looking at the racial and ethnic categories that define us in political, statistical, legal terms. And we continue to have to fight that. Along with the vote in 2020 for the presidential election, we also have to worry about the 2020 census. And it's still important to do. So my message to you, as I will send out an email to you that talks about how to access the racial and ethnic data. There's a seminar by the Census Bureau, in fact, tomorrow. So I'll give that to you. But also look at, what the congressional caucuses have done. And they don't exist just only at the federal level. They've done that also in California, where they've got the caucuses working together. That's really important. I'm so glad that you're going beyond the campuses and back into the community. So thank you very much.
Okay, so, all right, thank you, Juanita. Anybody have a question for Juanita? I see something in the QA here. Okay, somebody says, thank you all so much for the presentation. I really learned a lot. Some questions I have. How do you deal with burnout, especially how long it takes for these issues to be resolved? How do you create dialogue with those who are not already involved with the activist community or more resistant to these ideas? Certainly, any one of us can take that one. Why don't we get one of the younger generation to pitch in? Aniya or Law-rel, you want to take that first?
Yeah, a way that YVA and I myself have, gotten youth and, other people involved in the movement is by, leading workshops, writing workshops, creative writing workshops, and also just workshops to learn about the different organizing skills and also just activist skills and getting yourself involved and getting yourself educated. Another thing we do is also after school programs. We sometimes go to people's school and on Zoom, of course, and then we also just, have a curriculum and we do our school-based presentations, and that's how we got a lot of our youth involved. YVA also has an annual fellowship. This year is the 3rd fellowship, where we basically get about 40 youth. This year we had 70 youth, fortunately, and they complete basically a 6-month fellowship where they join a campaign call every single week and do work for that campaign, and at the end they get a stipend for their work, and they learn about the different organizing skills and how to get themselves involved. So those are just a few ways that we do that. Yeah.
I can definitely say what Aniya was saying definitely really resonated with me. My org does a lot of after school programs as well, to try to get into high schools, just to make people socially aware of what's happening. We also do college access series to help people prepare for college and things like that. So definitely impacting people from their jobs to their place of school is really important. And then as far as creating dialogue with those that are already involved and are more resistant to these ideas, I just think always have an open mindset when you go into having conversations with people about these things, especially about what they're going through, what they know, and what they've been through, because a lot of people aren't really heavy on the whole activist like stand, just because of like what they personally believe like we are fighting for. But if you can communicate what you want to fight for and like what it means to you, and like kind of look at both sides and see like, you know, kind of like what's happening, it's always great to have a dialogue with anybody, even if they're against what you're saying, what you're saying, because you can definitely like find a way to move forward as long as you stay open-minded and realize that somebody is coming to you from like a whole opposite lens.
Thank you to both of you. I just want to put in a plug for my Asian American public policy class. I know my students are here. One thing that I've tried to do is to take or to break down the barriers between the campus and the community and try and have these dialogues about important issues. And again, because we're an educational institution, I can't expect the students to parrot my views back and try to get an A. I have to teach them their own skills, help them develop their own perspective. So when they come out of my class, they are more effective at whatever they're doing, but it may not necessarily be something that I would be doing. But again, that's what happens in democracy. I think that I personally believe, and I know that many people believe, that we need to have strong voices of all different kinds, as long as they believe in democracy and don't want to tear it down and have some type of fascist autocracy like some people from the last administration. We need to be able to have a dialogue and talk about things and disagree respectfully and disagree with knowledge, with information. Like Juanita was saying, we have to have a census where everybody counts, where we, each of the 10 years, every 10 years, we have a situation where we do redistricting and we have reapportionment. And for those of you who don't know those processes, please look up those words and figure out a way to get involved in those. And if there are people who have a mathematical bent like Juanita and a social science bent who can get in there and participate in those battles, that's just as important, in some ways more important than just picking up a sign. We need you to get in there and to work day in, day out to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, not just people with your perspective, but everyone counts in a true democracy. Grace, what have you learned all these years, having been an activist in so many different movements?
Well, yeah, burnout is always, you know, something to think about, especially as the years pass by. But I think one thing that's helped is to think about activism kind of as like a lifestyle rather than a 9 to 5 or something, that kind of like activity. It's kind of like figuring out how you live your values, what you think is important. So similarly, I think like with folks that are, you know, are deep in their faith, you know, it's not like it's something that you burn out from or you turn off at a certain time. You live it. And I think what with activism, it's like what helps is when you are not just alone trying to figure it out. That's the importance of really joining together with people, developing a collective, becoming organized together so that you can help, you have each other to help figure it out. So I think for me, that has been a sustaining thing because, well, that's all.
Well, obviously, you're doing something right, because after all these decades, again, Grace has been involved for 20 years or more.
Holy moly, yeah.
Only 20, right. I actually gave a talk about this the other day, and I'll just summarize it. I was talking about Michi and Walter Weglin, who were very involved with the Japanese American redress movement. Michi wrote the book, Years of Infamy. And I was amazed at how they kept themselves going decades after decades after decades. Walter had been one of the few Jewish boys from his town in the Netherlands who was not killed by the Nazis. And he lost family members, friends. He came to the United States. I was amazed at how he was able to still work with Save the Children. He had a day job as a perfume chemist, but he spent a lot of time helping other people. And Michi had been in the camps and again, didn't become embittered. She became active and she went to the archives, got information, and wrote her book, Years of Infamy, that motivated myself and Grace and so many others to get involved and to get justice for our Japanese American community. So these are 9 things that Michi and Walter did to build a sustainable, meaningful life devoted to human rights. I can send this out if people are interested, but like Grace was saying, we have to build a supportive ohana, which is ohana is the Hawaiian word for your chosen family. You've got to have that network. Number 2, take care of your body, mind, and spirit. If you're feeling tired, just step back for a day. Don't feel like you're giving up. Just take care of yourself. Number 3, building time for justice into every day. So there are days I haven't done anything for social justice, but you know what? I'll go write a Facebook post that talks about one of my heroes who was involved with Black Lives Matter, with Japanese American redress. And so that may inspire some other people, even if it just took me 10, 15 minutes. And there are days like today where I'll spend more time, but everybody should spend some time every day. It's like an athlete. An athlete does sit-ups and push-ups, even when you can't get outside and play soccer or tennis. Number 4, give honest, loving feedback. Walter and Michi gave each other that feedback that allowed Michi to write a hard-hitting book that said, U.S. government, you put us in these camps. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, you great champion of civil rights, you were the one who signed Executive Order 9066. She may not have been able to do that without a loving, supportive, but critical partner in Walter. Number 5, close the circle, plan, do, reflect, and then start over. Plan, do, and reflect. Make sure you write thank you letters to people. If you want them to give a donation next time, if you want them to support your movement next time, make sure you thank them. I've talked to too many people who say, you know, I help that guy all the time, and he never even says thank you. He just assumes I'm going to be there. I'm a human being. I need thanks too. Celebrate as often as possible. And again, this is something that those of us who are long-timers have learned. You have to stop and say, we won at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We won the Korematsu case. We won whatever. And you celebrate. And Michi and Walter were very good at going out, having Chinese food, whatever. Whenever you win something, celebrate, because you don't always win. Number 7 is don't sweat the small stuff. Make sure that you may have something in your house. One quick story, Michi and Walter had every surface of their house covered by documents because Michi got so many documents at the National Archives that she put into her book. And so when you went to eat there, you would see these black plastic bags covering her coffee table. And instead we'd have to go out to eat at a Chinese restaurant. Same thing with Aiko and Jack. Aiko and Jack Herzig were 2 redress people who took the time to nurture other people like myself. They took time to go protest apartheid at the South African embassy, but their whole house was devoted to Japanese American redress. They moved out of their master bedroom so that they could have more space for documents, and they slept in the guest room, and visitors like myself slept on the floor. Number 8, keep on growing. I know I've had to learn. I'm sitting here taking notes when Aniya and Law-rel are talking. I'm learning these terms: lead circle coordinator, hip hop climate justice. I've got homework to do. When this thing is done, I'm going to go look up some of these terms that you're using, the red, black, and green New Deal. I'd heard about it, but I don't really know enough about it. So Aniya's given me some homework. I'm going to go out and check that out. And that gets to the 9th and final thing about building a sustainable, meaningful life devoted to human rights. Nurture the next generation. And what that means that I want to help Aniya and Law-rel keep going and learn something from me, from Law-rel's grandmother. And at the same time, I have to be open to learning from them. I know I learn from my students all the time. So to get back to our initial question about not burning out, I think that is my strategy and Michi and Walter's strategy for not burning out. Our former director and Professor Janelle Wong has a question. Janelle, come on board. I'm going to get off the video here. Welcome.
I did not have a question, but I will just say I've really appreciated this panel, and the insights you just shared, Phil, have been excellent as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, on top, Janelle has written amicus briefs related to affirmative action. If you could just take a minute, what sustains you? What keeps you going? How have you done this for so many years? I mean, you are an inspiration to me and so many others.
I think working with students is really helpful. And then also the kind of community building that you've been talking about, that connection you have with other people makes you feel like you're not alone. And so that's been a really nice part of listening to all the work that you all have done together. Juanita has also, I think, been a model for this kind of community building and communication across space and across generations. So I just thank you all for your contributions.
Okay, thank you, Janelle.
Phil, if I may, when I think of ways to deal with burnout, my basic approach, as you well know, is I'm a happy warrior. Okay. I'm going to be engaged in our movement for the rest of my life. I've been engaged as long as I can remember. And I remember as a child in grade school reading a book called Silent Spring by a woman named Rachel Carson. And she was saying that if we didn't get a grip, that one spring was going to come around and trees wouldn't bloom and the animals wouldn't look right, and they would start having 6 and 10 legs and stuff like that. And I closed my eyes, and it was around the 1980s, and I was working with a group called the Commission for Racial Justice, and they did a report called Toxic Waste and Race. And they showed how toxic waste dumps were always located next to minority communities. And I blinked my eyes today, and we've got young environmental activists like Greta Thunberg and Aniya Butler talking about environmental justice. And we've got to understand that our struggle does go from one generation to the next. And we've got to be prepared to be in it for the long haul. And we've got to be prepared for the ups and downs. But if we have faith and we keep on working, keep moving, we will see progress and we will see change. We've seen tremendous changes in our lifetime. And I know, like the rest of you, I'm hoping to see a lot more tremendous changes in the time that we're still here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Somebody's raising a question here. What do you say about Maryland using prison labor for dorm furniture? What can students do about it? That's the question here. Is there some student activism that's going on? Does somebody want to take a second and give us an update on that? We've got about 10 minutes left. Somebody want to say something for a few minutes or just 30 seconds or a minute? If you can just let us know on the chat function, maybe. Grace, did you have a question? I thought I saw you saying something.
Yeah, put it in the chat. Should I just say it?
Yeah, go ahead and say it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering what the panelists felt about the current moment we're in right now in the nation. You know, all the stuff that the pandemic and exposures of the police brutality and state violence, the white supremacist reaction, even this recent insurrection, all that stuff is exposing so much across the nation. So I was wondering what you guys thought about the current moment, what it means for our work and the direction.
Okay.
Yeah, I think when we look at these times, it can be sort of sometimes not like a hopeful moment, but we look at the times we're going through now, and it's just like sometimes it's just really crazy to think that this is what's going on in the world, and, we're going to be the ones left with it. And so sometimes it can feel like there's no more hope, but I feel like for my work, it's just more motivation for me to continue to do the work that I do, but also to, get others involved. I feel like organizing is not only about, planning actions and stuff. It's, making the movement bigger, making the movement more inclusive, making the movement effective. And by that, you have to have as many people as possible. And not only, you don't have to identify as an organizer to make a change. You don't have to identify as an activist to make a change. Making change is, the main goal for this whole thing. And so I feel like for my work, it just really motivates me. And even though it can feel really draining at times, I know that my work will pay off along with the other youth work and other adults' work. So, yeah.
Okay, so we're getting down to that part of the program where I like to give just 30 seconds to each of our panelists. Any summary statement you want to make, any URLs you want to tell us about, any, we've got your books, we've got everything in the resource list that Asian American Studies is going to post and have available. But is there anything you want to say to this audience here concerned about Japanese Latin American redress, Black Lives Matter issues? Jerome, you want to just make a summation?
Thanks, Phil. I really want to thank you and the program there at the university for doing this. I think this is a discussion that's long overdue, and I hope it's really just the beginning. And I would encourage everybody to look at the resources that Phil is gonna share with us. I also just stuck one in the chat on redistricting. It's actually a discussion, was a training, and was done by a nonprofit group called Nonprofit Vote. And it's a nonpartisan group that does a lot of training work. And this one was helping people understand the redistricting process. And folks need to realize redistricting isn't just about Congress, but it's about your state legislature, your city council, your school board, your county commission, your drain commission, road commission, any type of elected bodies that are out there that have districts that are drawn on maps. We've got to be at the table with our plans, or somebody else be at the table with their plans. And we know what that can end up like. And I think that on the bright side, some of the recent events, the numbers in the last election, as close as they were, and what happened in the national capital, just helped a lot more people realize just how much work we have to do, just how fragile and tenuous our democracy is, and how much more important it is for us to continue to do this work and press forward with the progressive agenda. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Jerome. So let's have each of the other panelists take 40 seconds, and I want to give our director, Julie Park, the final word. So Aniya, you want to say anything, mention any events or things that we should know about?
Yeah, if for more information about Youth versus Apocalypse and my work, you can go to youthversusapocalypse.org, which I will put in the chat. And just to keep up on the Hip Hop and Climate Justice Initiative, we will be releasing a song soon, so keep in tune for that. We recently released our EP, which is on the resources link, but I'll also put that in the chat. And then just to go to all our social media, which is at Youth versus Apocalypse, where we can keep up on our work and also more events that we're planning. But yeah, thank you guys for having me here.
Thank you so much. Laurel?
To close out, I would just want to first say thank you for everyone who came, and also thank you guys for the opportunity to speak on the panel. And I just want to make sure that something to leave it with is always make sure you stand up for what you believe in. Closed mouths never get fed. So just make sure that you're always fighting for the things you believe in, and speaking out against certain injustices. Check us out on our website, ariseeducation.org. I know it's in the resource list. You can also check us out on social media. at Arise Education. And you can just keep up with the different panels that we have going on, or the different conferences, or the different campaigns that we're working with. And to get more involved within your own communities, I'd personally say just reach out to any youth organizations around you so you can get more involved within your own community. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Laurel. I want to also mention that aside from these new groups, which are very energetic and exciting, Jerome worked for many years as an organizer for the NAACP, one of our venerable African-American organizations, started at the turn of the 20th century and did many good campaigns, stopping lynching and public education and stuff. So again, like we're doing today, I hope wherever you are, you will reach out to the established groups, reach out to the newer groups, try to bring everybody together. Everybody's got an interest in promoting social justice. Grace, what are your final thoughts?
Thanks. I guess I just want to stress that the juncture that we're at, as a country, is really exposing the centrality of racial oppression in the nation, particularly the fight against white supremacy and white nationalism. We need to call it out for what it is. Now's the time to do it. It's late in coming, and that we have to address not only its manifestations, but its really systemic structures and its intersections with like xenophobia, religious persecution, misogyny, and class oppression as well. And like HR 40 in particular, provides a framework and process to do this. And it's been on the table or brought to the table year after year. And I think now is a time where the consciousness of the country is such that people are realizing, that we have to deal with racism in the United States. And so we can continue to go down that road of denial and suppression and not dealing with it, or we can take a new direction. And I am so encouraged by what has been organized, especially through the Black Lives Movement, and how widespread, intergenerational, multiracial, multi-ethnic the response has been, and standing up to white supremacy and white nationalism. And so we can do this in our individual lives, in our organizations, the institutions we work with, at the city, at the state, at the federal level. We have to do it. It's necessary. The time is now. So I just say I look forward, to really joining with folks in that ongoing struggle.
Well, thank you. And thanks for all you've done all these years. So I want to thank all the panelists for everything they're doing, everything they've done. Let me turn it over to our director, Julie, for the final word.
Well, thank you, everyone. And as Phil said, I just want to thank again all of our great panelists. They gave us much food for thought and even more food for action. And I think truly what has been resonating, that action can be, on the national level, but also at the regional, state, and local level. Thank you so much for everyone that participated. And again, a special thank you and shout out to Juanita Lott, Tamayo Lott, for joining us and for just allowing for these kinds of programs to occur. And last but certainly not least, a great thank you to Phil Nash for, first of all, bringing together everyone for this great event, but also giving it enough time for discussion and conversation. And I really appreciated that. Thank you once again. Please be on the lookout for a recording of this program and a sharing out of all of the resources that were shared tonight. Good night, and I hope you all have a great evening.